Okay. Well, hello, everybody. I want to first just check, get a thumbs up from people online to make sure that you can hear us in this room. Okay. If everybody can, or if someone can give us a chat to let us know. Thank you. Good. Thank you so much. So we're working the best we can in terms of the audio in the room. If at any point you're not able to hear somebody, just let us know and we'll make sure to get a mic closer to them so we make sure that we can hear everybody well. So thank you all for joining for Handbook Advisory Group meeting number 6, and we really appreciate those in attendance here and online. We're going to move around here in just a moment to do some introductions. Just want to say first, online, please, there's going to be different times when we'll ask questions, and we'll be looking for you to input in chat, or please feel free to come offline at any point and just ask your question verbally. Raise your hand. And if at any point during the presentation as we go through the material you have a question, please just raise hand. We don't need to wait for question sections within the meeting, so please feel free to jump in if you have any particular questions. So we're going to turn over briefly to Casey for a welcome.
Yeah, I won't say too much that hasn't already been said, but thanks again for those that joined us in the room and those that are joining us virtually. We really appreciate you taking your time out to help us get this handbook developed. So we are getting close. We're going to have it done by the end of the year. And so today's a very important topic, UPWP and other related matters as far as work program goes. So thanks again for your all's input so far in reviewing the chapters. There'll be a few other chapters for y'all to review, and then we'll wrap it up at the end of the year. So very excited to be at this stage. So thank you all.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I didn't say on the front end, I'm Jim Wood with Kimley Horn, and we are supporting the MPO Handbook. We're part of the larger HNTV team that's supporting TPP with a lot of different parallel efforts for the overall metropolitan planning processes. So we're going to do introductions in the room, go around, and then we're going to go to introductions online. So we're going to start here. Hamza.
Hi, I'm Hamza Khan with Kimley Horn and helping support the MPO Handbook efforts.
I'm Travis Norton with HNTB.
I'm Annalisa Alicea Ruiz with HNTB.
Casey Wells with TxDOT.
David Jones, Lubbock, MPO.
Mackie Bergeron, Victoria MPO.
Juan Mendive, Laredo Webb, County Area MPO.
Radonna Jones, Stitch County MPO.
Thank you.
Bob Hazlett, Texas A&M Transportation Institute.
All right, thank you. So Allison online, would you be able to kind of lead us through who's on there?
Well, apologies if I call anybody in the room that has also joined online. But we'll just go down the list, and if you can introduce yourselves as I call your name. Adrian Leach.
Adrian Leach, TxDOT, Tyler District.
Amanda Allen.
Amanda Allen, Local Government Programs Section with TxDOT.
Arnold Bowles.
Yeah, my name is Arnold Bowles. I'm with PTN TxDOT.
Art Estrada.
Good afternoon, Art Estrada, El Paso District, Advanced Transportation Planning Office.
Brigida Gonzalez.
Brigida Gonzalez, Transportation Planner, TxDOT with PTN.
Brian McBride.
Brian McBride, Long MPO.
Susan Chavez.
Susan Chavez, Garver.
Shanna Eaton.
Shayna Eaton, Kimley Horn.
Wenyu Lee.
Hi, and you Lee, TPP Stitching.
Harrison Garrett.
Good afternoon, I'm Harrison Garrett with Kimley Horn.
Giacomo Quinto.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Giacomo Quinto, Statewide Planning Branch Manager at TPP.
Janie Temple.
Good afternoon, Janie Temple, TPP.
John Jameson.
Sorry, I was on mute. John Jameson, Local Government Programs at TxDOT.
Thanks, John. Karen Boder.
Good afternoon, Carrie Bodeker, TPP. Horn. Rubella Horn with Kimley Horn.
Laredo MPO.
We're in the room. We're hosting.
Maybe in the room.
All right. I think that's everybody. Yes?
All right. Melee.
Oh.
Barbara Maley, Federal Highway, Texas Division, soon to be retired.
Oh. We're crying. Congratulations, Barbara. James McGill.
James McGill, Kimley Horn.
Michael Howell.
Michael Howell, Tyler Area PO. And Barbara, you're not allowed to retire. We need you.
And next we have Peter.
Peter Mario with HNTB.
Raymond Sanchez.
Good afternoon, Raymond Sanchez, TPP Division Office.
Robert Hazlitt.
He's in the room.
Sarah Garza.
Good afternoon, Sarah Garza, TxDOT, TPP.
Shannon Hawkins.
Hi, Shannon Hawkins, TxDOT, TPP.
Joanne Gray.
Joanne Gray, Texarkana MPO.
All right, I was trying to catch, I think we may have a couple more people that have joined. Catherine McCray.
Catherine McCray, TxDOT Houston.
Philip Tyndall.
Philip Tyndall, TxDOT, TPP Austin.
And is there anyone else that joined us we did not yet introduce? Okay, Jim, I'll turn it back over to you then.
Okay, thank you so much, Allison, and thank you all for joining. We've got great attendance here today, and want to be sure to acknowledge Juan Mendive and his group with Laredo Webb County MPO, as well as the folks, I think, from the library and the county. I mean, there's a whole set of folks here making this all happen today, and we really appreciate you accommodating the meeting here, letting us descend upon this group. So thank you again. Our agenda today is pretty straightforward. We're going to do a little bit of review of kind of where we are with the overall status of the handbook and kind of an update on one or two items related to that. But our main focus is going to be on MPO work program administration and then a little bit on the supporting resources. And I'll talk a little bit more about that overall in a moment, and then just kind of a quick look ahead. We've shared this slide before, but this gives you the overall view of there are 11 topics actually on this list here. Public involvement and Title VI are kind of tied together. If you're wondering why they look like there's 10, but there's 11 topics, and then there's an introduction chapter. So overall, the first edition of the handbook will have 12 chapters. We'll talk about that chapter order in a moment, as well as the schedule. But the Handbook Advisory Group includes at least 10 MPOs, 6 districts, 3 divisions for TxDOT, and then a federal highway as well. So there's been a lot of effort that began a year ago. At this point was our first advisory group meeting. This is our 6th meeting now, so we've had quite a bit of progress as we move forward through this process. This is a resource catalog overview. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of things that are happening in parallel. A little bit later, after we go through the handbook chapter content, Travis is going to touch on this briefly and talk about some of the specific resources that tie to this topic of the MPO Work Program Administration chapter. But this is really to give you an idea of the breadth of what is happening parallel to what is going on with the advisory group. And many of you may be aware from some of these because of outreach that's been conducted to communicate with you for various components of this overall effort. So it's just kind of a collective effort, really just trying to kind of advance the entire program. So we always show the schedule slide, and this is where we are. There's a little bit of refinement here and there on this, but know that there's going to be a lot coming in the next few months. And so the progression of how we've worked through things and getting some things teed up initially, and getting through several of the initial chapters, we know that there will be a lot that will be kind of coming your way over the next few months. So be aware of that. We're going to talk about one of those chapters today, MPO Work Program Administration, but yet to come and soon to come actually is air quality and Title VI, and then public involvement will be behind that. And then statewide planning, programming, and tips. So those are the ones that have not yet come to the advisory group. So those will be coming to you soon. Always want to remind about the broader advisory group SharePoint folder or website. So this is where you can go to get the current status. Actually, we're going to have the, I don't know if you can put that link in the chat. Oh, I think Travis is doing it actually. If you haven't bookmarked it before, bookmark it now, but this is the way to go and see where we are. If you open up the active reviews folder right now for the advisory group, you'll see that there's nothing in there because we're in this moment in between some things where you're about to have several things added in there very soon. So just be aware of that. But this is also the place where you can get the meeting materials. So under the meeting materials, for example, today, the slides that we're going through, there's a PDF of those slides in the meeting number 6 folder. So if you want to see this PDF of the slides that we're going through, feel free to pull that up and take a look at that as well. Some of the slides do have a little bit of detail on them, which is with intent, not because we're going to try to read through it all, but we wanted to have that material and information. So in the slides, you can have that after the meeting. To echo what Casey said up front, we thank you so much for the time that you all have taken so far to provide input to this process. It's very valuable. It's very helpful. You see things that maybe we're not always seeing, and you're coming with perspectives that are very helpful as we go through this. As you see it through the eyes of what you're doing in your work, whether you're with an MPO or TxDOT or Federal Highway, what perspectives you bring are helpful to this process. So in the last meeting, we talked about the overall handbook chapter order, and we took input, and got a little bit of input after the meeting as well. So just to let you know, this is where we have landed with the final handbook chapter order. There were some suggestions to change chapter titles, but we had already kind of worked through things in a way that we were going to continue with the chapters as they're titled right now. But we did move things around a reasonable bit in the center of this. So from 5 down to 11, all of those moved around a bit. So just to give you a summary, Metropolitan Transportation Plan moved up in front of TIP. We had heard that comment from multiple folks. And then we put the ones that are more specific to certain MPOs, congestion management, air quality moved down to the bottom. So they're at 10 and 11. And then we had the progression of performance management, public involvement in Title VI. So all of those 5 through 11 moved around a little bit. But this is the set of chapters that will be in that first edition that we're developing. Okay, now we're going to go on to what is our bigger topic for this meeting, and that's work program administration. And just want to kind of tee that up by saying, initially we were calling this chapter on the topic of chapter names. It was going to be the UPWP chapter, but as things progressed, we kind of saw that we wanted to look at this a little bit more holistically in terms of some of the processes around administration that are tied to the UPWP, but other things that you do. So plus there were, as we've said before, other parallel resources being developed that we wanted to have them kind of move a little further along in development so that we could be at a point where this chapter will be reflective of the most recent information that we've put together. So that's been put together overall by the team. So that's what this chapter is now called, MPO Work Program Administration. And we are soon finalizing this chapter for TxDOT review, and then it will go to advisory group review in our normal process. So this is a look at what are the main sections in this. Obviously, an introduction that's kind of basically teeing up like we do with any of our chapter topics. And then focusing on UPWP preparation, everything that will look in terms of content format, and then on that review and approval process as well. Then transportation planning funds requests for reimbursement, focusing on authorizations, expenditures, invoices, revisions. We'll talk about that a little bit here. And then the annual performance and expenditure report, focusing on the closing out of funds at the end of the federal fiscal year. And then any of our chapters, they all finish with a references section. So again, this is the general topics that you will see in the chapter once it comes around to you. And that's what we'll be looking for today, is any input that you may have on these overall topics. So this next slide shares kind of that, shows these three ideas that are within this chapter, but shows them in kind of the cyclical flow. As we know, the whole process that's centered around UPWP and your normal processes to administer your programs is one that continually moves in cycles. So first, focusing on the preparation of the UPWP, which is important, the MPO developing that and updating it as necessary, and then approving the new one, on the basis of whether you're doing it in a 1 year or a 2 year process. Then the step of invoicing and all that goes along with implementing your tasks and going through requests for reimbursement. And then finally, as we mentioned on the prior slide, the closeout, moving things through the process for developing and submitting the APR. So at this point, I am going to turn this over. There's going to be a shared presentation. Harrison Garrett is online, is going to be presenting some of the next slides that we move through here. And then Hamza here is going to go ahead and present some of the other content as well as along with us. So I think we're just going to put all these animations in here. So Harrison, and I would just precede this. This is one of these areas where you're going to see on some of these slides a lot of text. This is intentional. We wanted to have that showing some of the information that you'll be seeing in the handbook itself. But in terms of the overall introduction to the handbook, this is going to be one of those things that's summarized up front. So Harrison?
Hey, thanks, Jim. Like Jim said, I'm Harrison Garrett. I am with Kimley Horn, and I'm one of the authors for the chapter. We'll be going over several slides to kind of give you an overview of some of the subjects that are going to be appearing in that draft chapter when it comes for your review. One of which we're going to start off with is talking about the funding sources. The funding that appears in the UPWP, as we know, can come from a variety of sources. On the federal side, we have examples that include the FHWA Metropolitan Planning Funds, or PL funds, the FTA 5303, the Congestion Management and Air Quality, or CMAQ funds, the Surface Transportation Block Grant, STPG funds, and then the Transportation Alternative Program funds, as well as various discretionary grants that the MPOs can pursue. On the state side, we have state funds that are used to meet the matching requirements that can be either a soft match, such as where we use the transportation development credits or toll credits, or a hard match using direct or cash funds. And then we have local funds that are any other funds obtained for the MPO that aren't from the federal or state authorities.
Harrison, you just let us know when you want to go to next. Okay.
And then here we kind of have our breakdown for the funds that comprise the Transportation Planning Funds, or TPF. The TPF is also referred to as the Consolidated Planning Grant, or CPG. The CPG is the program that combines the remaining FTA 5303 funds with PL funds into a single PL fund amount. So by converting the 5303 to PL fund, it gives the flexibility for using the remaining funds for the next fiscal year. The 5303 classification is no longer a constraining factor once it's consolidated, and it streamlines the delivery of those federal funds. And PL funds comprise the majority of the funding used by the MPOs. Slide, please. And then here we have some of the other federal funds that are used in the UPWP. These include the CMAQ, the STBG, and the TA funds. CMAQ funds are also called Category 5 or Cat 5 funds and are used to fulfill the requirements for the Clean Air Act for non-attainment areas. STBG program funds, also called Cat 7 funds, replace the Service Transportation Program. STBG funds are awarded to Transportation Management Area or TMA MPOs and provide flexibility of funding to preserve and improve federal aid transportation infrastructure, such as highways and bridges. TA funds, referred to as Cat 9 funds, are for smaller scale transportation projects from the set aside of STBG funds. Examples of those projects that use TA funds include the pedestrian bicycle facilities, as well as community improvements such as rec trails and historic preservation projects. Next slide. Here we have an overview of the distribution formula that's developed by TxDOT and was made in consultation with the Texas MPOs and was later approved by FHWA, and there's several steps involved. First, there is the takeoff. It is the annual funding component of $2,500 for the Texas Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations, or TEMPO, for meeting support. The set aside is the annual funding amount of $75,000 distributed to each qualifying MPO that is designated as a non-attainment area or TMA. The population distribution amount is based on the remaining TPF amounts and is distributed to each MPO based on their population proportions to the total state urbanized area populations. And this is based on the US Census estimates. The minimum distribution is the set amount of $375,000 for each MPO and they will receive at minimum, even if population amounts would otherwise calculate a lower amount for that funding level. The MPOs that fall below that are then going to be automatically raised up to meet that minimum $375,000 threshold through funding redistribution calculations that reallocates evenly between the MPOs that would otherwise receive more than the $375,000. And then finally, the last step is the final calculation of total TPF funding for each MPO after factoring in the set-aside amounts and distribution or redistribution amounts. Next slide, please. Here we have the overview for the work orders. So work order 1 authorizes the consolidation of the 5303 program funds with PL funds. It is issued around May and is confirmed by FHWA in July. MPOs are notified with the work order 1 letter in October, which includes the allocation amounts. Work order 2 authorizes the updated PL funds and includes that 2.5% set-aside amount that must be documented in the UPWP. PL balances are received from FHWA in September, and TxDOT obligates the amounts in November. So MPOs then receive their work order 2 letter in January. And then finally, work order 3 authorizes the carryover amount of the prior UPWP funds to the new state fiscal year. The obligation and reobligation occurs in December, but cannot be processed until all MPO billings are received. So FHWA will approve the amounts in February, and the MPOs will receive their work order 3 letter later in that same month in February with the updated balances.
Before we leave that slide,
Yes,
I think...
and as Casey said in the chat, these dates are aspirational right now.
Okay, go ahead.
And next we have kind of a discussion for the overview of the non-construction advanced funding agreements for federal funds other than TPF, such as CMAQ, STBG, or TA funds. Non-construction advanced funding agreements, or NCAFAs, are established for planning studies. NCAFAs serve as the contracts between TxDOT and NPOs or local governments that are involved for those federal funds. The agreements define work responsibilities between the named parties, funding, and any in-kind contributions. The agreements are developed and managed at the district level, and it should be noted that AFAs are not required for planning under TPF.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in here.
At this point, I'm going to hand it back over to Jim.
Yeah, we've gone through a lot of information here, so we want to take one of these first kind of stops We're happy to go back to any slides and have a little more discussion on any of these topics if you have questions or something that you want to have a comment on. So at this point, first just generally asking, are there any questions or comments on any of the information that we've provided in the slides so far? If you're online, please feel free to raise your hand or submit a chat. So we'll kind of press it this way. Oh, right
It's
down.
a simple question.
Yeah, if you can make sure to speak into the mic so they can hear you online.
Okay, just a simple question concerning carryover, because that's part of our funding also, if we have carryover from previous years, because I don't think we received it yet, or we just received it, and this year is just about was over, you know. So when will carryover be included with this also?
Yes. Yes, it is in it. Yes.
Can you go back to the slide with the dates? So best case, obviously, you know, we can't calculate carryover until we close the books. That depends a little bit on the MPOs. And then when we have those, that reconciliation done, then we can submit that request to Federal Highway for an update to the FPAA, the federal authorization. So the earliest we could ever really do this, if you think about the APR timeline, would be like January, February. This year, January, February, even up into March was kind of tricky with what was going on with DC and stuff. So we had some stuff there to work through, and then we just had a couple of internal delays, to be honest with you. And so we just got it out a couple of weeks ago, I think, maybe 3 weeks ago. But again, I think once we're continuing to approve a lot of things at one time, but I know that this is a priority for you all. So we'll definitely continue trying to get these out as early as possible. Not to go off topic here real quick though, but work order 1, the second bullet there, we've got, I think that's where we are right now. We submitted the request to get those funds authorized, I think just yesterday actually. Trying to get that done before FEMA's closes tomorrow. I'm not sure if we're going to make that deadline, but one way or another, we'll have work order 1 out probably in the month of October, we hope. And then work order 2, we've typically waited till towards the end of the year. It has to do with the federal system there as well. But again, we know that this is a priority for you also. We'll work harder to get it out earlier this year.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Art, I think you have your hand raised.
Can you guys go back to the non-construction funding? I think it's the second to the last slide.
This one?
Yeah. So my question was just on the first bullet. It's not non-construction AFAs are not just subject to those funding categories that are outlined. They're, you know, they can be category 7 STP or any other applicable non-construction funding categories, MPL funding category.
Okay.
That was my question. So it's y'all are not documenting it just for these funding categories, right?
Well, this is what we were going to address it for, but we can address it beyond that scope. You're talking about there's going to be other categories than just those 3, correct?
Correct. So within the MPL funding category realm, it could also be category 7 STP funds that can fund a non-construction project. So all I'm saying is there non-construction projects or programs that have AFAs aren't limited to these funding categories listed here.
Understood. Yep.
Okay. And I think this is Travis. I would just say the most important thing is that bottom line that AFAs are not required for planning under TPF. So any other funding source that MPO would use
say that
for
question
planning.
again. Can you say that question again?
This is Art. Were you asking me or?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't catch what you were asking, Art.
So I was just pointing out on the first bullet that for districts and MPOs to establish non-construction AFAs or planning studies or any other type of non-construction program or project, they're not subject to only the funding categories listed here. You could also use category 7 STP as an example for non-construction projects.
Well, I think that STBG is STP, right? It is Cat 7, right?
Correct. Okay.
But you are correct. They're not limited to just those funds. But I mean, you could just say, you know, as an example, instead of making it sound limited.
Yeah, I think that's a good
That's what
point.
I would do. I agree with Catherine.
That's a good point, Catherine. We can make sure we reflect that in the chapter. And then just like I mentioned, that bottom point, AFAs are not required for planning under TPF, so it would really be any other federal funding source.
The main thing here that I remember Jose telling me was that regardless of the funding source, Federal Highways wanted to be aware of the work that was being performed by the MPO for planning level work. Now, CMAQ doesn't normally pay for planning, right? Usually MPOs use that for things that are not planning work. They use it for, you know, carpool, van pool. Those are not, as I understand it, those are not really considered planning. They're air quality type projects. But they still go under an NCAFA.
Okay.
So let me ask this, non-construction can, you know, it could be defined as other projects, right? Not tied to planning. Some of them, the majority of them are tied to planning, but you could certainly have non-construction projects or programs that is tied to an AFA that can be utilized, like Catherine said, on a van pool, on you know, on a hero program and so forth. Okay. So those aren't specifically planning studies, but they fall within the realm of a non-construction program or project that will have an AFA for federal funds, with federal funds.
Absolutely, and I would even venture to say that at least in Houston, we have more that are the latter. They're not planning. We are overseeing probably right now about 75 million in non-planning, non-construction AFAs for the incident management, for, you know, carpool, van pool, TDM activities, that kind of stuff.
Okay, this is
most of the planning work is actually done out of UPWP. They use some for a little bit of planning work for NCAFAs, but most of, at least my MPOs, NCAFAs are for non-planning activities.
Okay, we really appreciate that input. This is very helpful. Exactly the reason that we're having a discussion about a point like this. So we'll make sure to have that clarity within the chapter topic and make sure that's balanced in the way that reflects exactly what you all are sharing. So thank you so much on that. Are there any other questions on that topic or anything else that we've covered so far? Okay. So I want to take us just a little bit through the steps for UPWP preparation here. I mean, you all are familiar with this, and I think I'm going to say I think some of these dates these are probably pretty locked in, not aspirational. But let's kind of step through this. We'll mention in a moment the templates, but TPP will be, teed up and set up to be providing the materials and whatever the current template is to MPOs by January. So that's starting point. Obviously, prior to that time, you may already be in the process of thinking about and planning for what your UPWP is going to cover, but that's the point at which you will have the current template to be used for the cycle that's forthcoming. And then in February is office hours by TPP to be able to support the process as you're going through the development of things and helping you kind of understand. So that's kind of a administrative support side to this whole process. You're in the process of developing that UPWP and then moving towards April. And so that period from January to April, again, like I said, understand that you're probably working on that ahead of that time, but in more earnest during this time period, drafting that UPWP in concert with your partners. In May, by May 1st, MPO submitting the draft to the text.MPO coordinator, and then TPP is going to conduct its review and confirm that UPWP. This is that process then as we move into July. You need to have the governing board adoption before July 15th. So this is that little point between May 1st, July 15, when you're going to need to have that meeting for that adoption. So that's a key thing to be remembering. If you have, by the way, I just want to mention this, last meeting we talked about the public involvement chapter, and we talked about those things which do or do not require a public comment period, and the UPWP does not, but you may in your PPP have established something at the level of your MPO. So of course that has bearing here as well if you have established that as some kind of comment period or way in which that's going to be reviewed. So that's a consideration as well for those who have done that. Then the MPO coordinator submits the adopted UPWP to Federal Highway and FTA by August, and then approval takes place of the adopted UPWP by October 1st. So that's kind of a progression of moving through, and this is obviously information that we'll have directly in the chapter, but just wanting to give this kind of summary of these steps. So before I step away from this, are there any questions about those steps? Okay. UPWP contents and format. So this is the framework that is used to organize the material and the information. The UPWP is that kind of statement of work of your priorities within the MPA, your plan area. And so, on the front end of this is your introduction. I'm going to say a few things about that in just a moment, but then those core task areas, administration and management, data development and maintenance, short-range planning, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and then special studies. And then, of course, the budget summary is a key part of that as well. So this is collectively those series of task areas that define that work, and this is the template layout that is being used, and you'll see that there's a template that's going to be provided, and is provided, I guess, for 1 and 2 year UPWPs to ensure consistency. Going back just to say a few words about the introduction, this is one of those chapters that really helps to define some of the things for your MPO that maybe isn't defined real clearly everywhere else. And it's kind of setting what are the emphasis areas, what are the priorities, so trying to leverage the use of that introduction to kind of really explain what the MPOs are doing. Obviously, you have things like the long-range plan with goals and sometimes vision that helps overall too, but this is kind of thinking operationally, and then also kind of over time, what is the overall emphasis? So thinking about that chapter for that purpose. It's pretty self-evident what most of these task areas are: admin, management, data development, maintenance. Short-range planning is going to hit on the tip. It's going to hit on your annual list of projects, priority projects, UPWP itself, and then of course MTP is pretty self-evident too. And then special studies capturing those other items that are not captured within those. And then no plan is a good plan without a lot of appendices. So here's several that are going to be key to this. UPWP, you're all probably very familiar with the majority of these. But these are those specific items that are going to be included. Notice Appendix H, optional for fiscal year 26, but required in 27. This will be a completed UPWP checklist. So this is something that's going to be added to, maybe in the same way that you might have done this for another kind of plan where you have a checklist that you've included in the documentation, but that will be something that will be included in the future. And this is one of those parallel resources that's being developed. So before I step away, we're going to go to a question, but before I step away from either of these slides, are there any questions about the contents and format of the UPWP? Maggie.
Hello. Okay. So I hope.
Try to speak up as loud as you can.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I know it's.
Hello. Okay. So this might be a little out in left field, but since we brought up the boundaries, I've noticed recently that the smoothed urbanized area boundary that TxDOT has available is completely different than the one that's on the FTA website. And so I just didn't know if that was me missing something, or we still need those boundaries to be updated, weighted upon, because it was approved in my UPWP, the one that I had submitted. So I just want to make sure that we're consistent.
Yeah, so the TxDOT boundary is the source of record for your approved boundary. That's the one approved by the governor. If you're seeing some discrepancies, let us know and we can try to connect with FTA on that. We're seeing a similar discrepancy with Corpus Christi, and we're trying to work to resolve that as well. They're also going through a new boundary adjustment, though, and so we're primarily focused on what the new one's going to look like, but we'd like to kind of clean up our records. So if you're seeing that with your old stuff, if you see it different from us and FTA and Federal Highway, let us know and we'll get together and work on that.
So just Maggie's question, for those who may have not heard it all, just she was asking about the difference between smooth urban area boundary on TxDOT, which Casey's affirming is the record of the actual boundary. If it's different elsewhere, then you need to just communicate with TxDOT about that.
Just one more thing. Does TxDOT have authority to approve our smooth boundaries?
From the census?
Where we just did them? Yeah.
No, Federal Highway approves the smooth urban boundary.
Okay.
And then that is a factor into the new the MPO boundary, which the governor approves through recommendation by TxDOT.
Okay, so what we submitted, we just have to wait until the governor has approved everything.
Right. So the smooth boundary from the census, that's all been approved by Federal Highway a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And then the MPOs use that to assess their boundary.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. We wanted to just pause here for a moment. I had mentioned about the introduction, and I think we wanted to know, for the purpose of just thinking more broadly than some of the kind of technical administrative that we're going through here, is anything you all can be sharing on how your MPO makes decisions about priorities and the focus of the work within the UPWP, and how that's reflected in the way in which you create it. And then, importantly, how do you make a case for these priorities, whether it's, ultimately you're going through this discussion with your boards or maybe your committees and others. So I think we just want to kind of pause for a moment to have this kind of broader question asked, how you're making decisions about priorities and making the case for those within your UPWP. Anyone want to share on that? Ray Donna?
As far as construction wise, we follow our 10-year plan that we submit to TxDOT every year to see if any of our projects moved in ranking. And that's how we do as far as our construction wise projects that are coming, what Cat 2 funding we'll use and where it'll go. Okay. And we discuss it with our policy board and TAE.
Okay. Thank you. Others like to add to that? Juan?
Yes, thank you. but we work with our technical committee pretty much to see what studies we want to do more than anything, since our technical committee members are also like people from the county, the city, different project partners. We want to make sure that the plan studies that we're doing are going to be something that can be implemented. So that's why we work with them. We don't want to just be doing plans that are going to sit on the shelf. That's why we ask them also what plans they would like to do.
Okay, great. Making sure of that alignment. So thank you. Maggie?
So I'm just going to move it here. Sorry. For the Victoria MPO, obviously we take direction from our policy committee, but we are kind of backlogged behind on some plans. So it's been pretty easy. But the past couple of years, we are coming up on, now we have to start creating, I like to call it a plan of plans. So just through stakeholder interviews, keep asking away, and I have a little chart log of what gets brought up most often.
Okay, great. Great. Any others online? We can, by the way, you can submit some thoughts on this in chat as well, but anyone online who want to jump in on that? Decisions about priorities? Okay. All right, well, thank you for the input. We will proceed to the next, and I think I'm going to be turning it over to Hamza.
Thanks, Jim. Yes, this is, yes. I'll be going through just for the UPWP what requires a major or minor revision. So we have this table that kind of shows the different actions and different approvals by either the policy board, TxDOT, or FHWA FTA. So for major revisions, a few of the things that are kind of incorporated within that is an increase in total budget. So not to be confused with the task budget. That does require major revision, and it requires approval from both policy board and TxDOT. And then not from if you're non-TMA, you don't need an FHW or FTA approval. So, but TxDOT does share a courtesy copy. If you are a TMA, you do have to get an approval from FHW and FTA. And it's kind of similar with all major revisions. Increase in task budget by more than 25%, as well as adding new work tasks or changing the scope of existing work tasks. All of those require approval from your policy board. Then that goes to TxDOT, and then from there, TxDOT takes that to FHW FTA, depending on if you're a TMA or non-TMA. For minor revisions, these are any things that are considered task budget increase or decrease of less than 25%. At the policy board level, this is dependent on the MPO. So if the MPO bylaws require it to be approved at the policy board level, then you go back through and get an approval from the policy board. However, you don't need to get an approval from TxDOT or FHWA, and just most MPOs provide a courtesy copy. And then anything other that is not considered a major revision, those kind of fall in the minor revisions. And we have a discussion question in a couple slides that kind of ties back to this, so I'll hold that for now. And then in terms of submitting the amendments, for major revisions, there's a question.
Oh yeah, I had a question.
Go for it.
I was just gonna actually mention something, just a suggestion. I know maybe when we actually review the chapter, we can mention that. But under what it says required by MPO bylaws, maybe I would put bylaws for policies. So I know, like for example, we dictate some of that in our public participation plan and not the bylaws. Just a point.
So for those online, I don't know if y'all heard, but Laredo MPO includes that in their PIP rather than their bylaws, and that's how they go about approving minor revisions. Thanks for that feedback. All right, and then in terms of submitting the UPWP amendments for major revisions, you submit basically an amended UPWP or redline version of it, additional federal funds or changes in costs, and then any agenda and meeting minutes from those various board approval meetings. And then for minor revisions, you just send a courtesy copy. And then this is kind of the process of the amendment. So MPO submits the revision to the MPO coordinator, TxDOT. The coordinator reviews, provides comments back to the MPO. MPO goes through and addresses those comments, and then takes that UPWP back to the governing board to get that adopted. The amendments adopted. The MPO submits finalized amended UPWP redline version and approval documents. Coordinator finalizes the review of the amended UPWP, and then for TMAs, the coordinator then sends that on to FHWA and FTA for approval. And I know within this process, there are places where I'm curious to get some of the MPOs and other folks' thoughts on where you see challenges. We've heard from some MPOs that, once the coordinator sends some reviews back, the governing board, you go through and approve those minutes and makes the changes and get the UPWP amended, but then when you send it back, you might get some additional comments. I know I'm kind of jumping ahead in terms of our discussion question, but curious to get folks' thoughts on how the amendment process has worked out for people. Thoughts online? Okay. So assuming it flows mostly smoothly for most folks. All right. And then so the discussion question we have is, Brian, go ahead.
I was just going to affirm you, Hamza, saying, yeah, it's primarily smoothly when I do an amendment. I rarely do them, but when I do, it's pretty smoothly. So just affirming because no one else is saying anything.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
To say something.
All right. Discussion topic. So MPO or program administration. Has your MPO established a process for UPWP revisions requiring board approval and those that can be made administratively?
Yes. Ours is in the public participation plan. But I mean, they follow the guidelines that, 25% under. I am burdened with an annual UPWP, so I feel like I'm always making amendments too. So we definitely try and keep those as like minor amendments, but when they are major, again, it's our committee understands that that's funding, and we just submit it to TxDOT, and usually it's A-okay. So
Yeah, it's the same with us. We cite it in the public participation plan, and pretty much just cite the administrative code that mentions that it can be under 25%. You can do that administratively, and then we also just mention that we can make like grammatical corrections and things like that as well as administrative revisions.
Same as everyone else. We have it in our public involvement plan. We have a chart, tells you what requires a administrative modification, what requires an amendment, and we follow different thresholds as to what the CFR says. And also, we run numbers all year long to make sure we're not following or not going to be out of the 25% over or under. And so sometimes, yes, we make amendments or revisions. And sometimes they're just, like I say, administrative modifications, and we send it in to TxDOT.
I would also just like to say that your chart is what inspired my PPP's chart. So always a good thing to look at. And much easier than reading through the PPP core documents, what we have to do. So.
Sounds good. Anyone else online?
I just want to follow up what just the overall thing is there. Just to make sure everything that was in the chart that we showed you, everyone's comfortable with, looks good. I guess all we need is, I think we're hearing things go smoothly, people have the way in which they're doing some of this depicted in their PPP, but just wanted to be sure that a chart from the slide before. Yeah, if there's any questions there, that's what we want to know. There's a more detailed version of this that this is built from or drawn from. So, but if there are any questions or issues with that, please let us know.
Yeah, just change the bylaws part to the public involvement, and that'll be fine.
And include policy. Okay. Yep. Thank you so much. Is it back to me?
All right, the next topic is direct and indirect costs. So these are direct costs are considered, for one service or function that is tied to a planning activity or a federal award. So these are considered as salaries and wages, travel expenses specifically related to a planning activity, equipment or materials, again, specifically related to an activity or a project. Those are considered direct costs, and then indirect costs are support for day-to-day facilities and administrative functions. They cannot be tied to a specific grant or program, so they kind of get lumped in terms of benefits or rent and utilities, or more on the operational side, such as management softwares or executive management salaries. One of the things that several folks do is the de minimis rate. So if an MPO doesn't have a federally approved indirect cost rate, they may use a de minimis indirect cost rate of up to 15% of the modified total direct costs, or basically it's a default generalized cost, but there's some stipulations associated with that. You can't be a recipient of more than $35 million in federal funding. You can't already have an approved indirect cost rate. So that means you haven't gone through the process of developing indirect costs based on various items such as a distribution of costs and various agreements with agencies. And then also you may be required to submit a certification letter to TxDOT for that de minimis rate. But that is basically a default indirect rate, is a good way of looking at it if you don't want to go through the process of actually allocating what your indirect costs and coordinating those items. So the next discussion topic we have is, do you all have an indirect cost rate for things that don't fit into one specific task? How did you establish this rate? I guess question for folks here, do y'all have indirect costs, or do y'all use de minimis mostly?
So this is Allison. I'll just chime in on this. And I know that as we've looked at this issue in other states, this has been, I think, one of the sticking points, I guess, that we've seen folks encounter. So we were kind of particularly curious how the MPOs are handling this, and if this feels like this goes smoothly, or if there are kind of particular practices that folks have put in place to kind of establish this and smooth it out.
Is the silence because?
Why,
Oh, go ahead.
I have a question. Why would an MPO, why would you have an indirect cost rate, a rate that changed by tax?
By task?
Is that the same thing that you're asking here? Because if you have a rate, it should apply across the board, right?
Well, I think the distinction here is whether someone's using de minimis or whether they're setting something that's their own. They're setting some indirect cost rate across the various tasks. Right. So, Allison, I don't know if this is something that with what you've kind of seen more broadly if you have an example of that.
Yeah, good question, Jim. I think it kind of speaks to what you were just mentioning. I think we were interested about the de minimis versus how folks were dealing with the indirect cost rate. Or perhaps this question isn't raised quite clearly enough for folks to grapple with how that looks in your particular agency.
Yeah, I was going to mention, so as an MPO, we don't use an indirect cost rate, but I know our fiscal agent, the city of Laredo, is exploring that so they can charge us for the HR, IT, legal services that they provide. I think they're trying to determine how to do that. So.
Okay, thanks, Juan.
I don't think MPOs use it, just the indirect cost rate for anything. If anything, that would probably go to your fiscal agent. And if they charge us that, they'll tell us, but
yeah,
they'll charge us that.
So for those that may not have read on it, said, doesn't see MPOs typically doing this or using this. This is something that the fiscal agent may be making the determination on, which echoes what Juan just said. So
Mm-hmm.
Do you think some of the larger MPOs, sorry, as I said, do you think some of the larger MPOs may set an indirect cost rate since they have a lot more?
They
overhead?
may. From what I understand, I'm a bi-state MPO. If I make no mistake, Arkansas does the minimus, and they set their indirect rate costs, but not Texas.
Oh, so Donna just mentioned that that Arkansas, since she's a bi-state MPO, Arkansas sets their de minimis rate for her. Any other thoughts on this topic before we move on? All right.
okay, I think we're turning it back over to Harrison at this point.
Thanks. Yeah, here we'll pick up where we're talking about the eligibility of expenditures, and whether an expenditure is eligible or ineligible is governed by federal and state rules. Any cost must be justifiably necessary and reasonable and needs to be documented and included in the approved budget. And costs can be incurred after receiving FHWA authorization first. In certain instances, prior approval is required for certain expenses before they can be incurred. These are just kind of a list of examples. The chapter itself will have a far more in-depth expansion on a lot of these different examples, but typically what we kind of talk about is travel expenditures outside of the state of Texas, food and beverage purchases, and purchases over $10,000 when using TPF. Some common examples of eligible and ineligible costs. One that we were wanting to kind of bring to attention was the professional memberships or subscriptions are eligible expenses if on behalf of the MPO itself as the subscriber, and if related to completing work for the federal award. But any other memberships owned by, say, an employee or individual, or owned by the MPO that is not related to that federal award, are not eligible for being expended on. Program evaluation, data analysis, and specific project expenses such as freight and delivery costs are eligible for expenditure, whereas additional ineligible costs include entertainment, commencement ceremony costs, and alcohol purchases. Slide, please.
Yeah, we were just gonna, I want to reemphasize something that Harrison mentioned, that is within the handbook chapter will have more detail on this. I think we recognize, not just here, but in other states as well, this is one of these things that ends up becoming a real point of trying to understand exactly what falls under eligible and ineligible. So we will come back and ask some broader questions in a moment, but just understand that we'll have more detail on that, and be thinking about if you have any questions about what we presented here. So go ahead, Harrison.
Thanks. And here's the general overview for the request for reimbursement or RFR process. So TxDOT serves as that pass-through entity for TPF, so therefore the MPOs are the subrecipients in this relationship. The administrative requirements, cost principles, audit requirements for federal awards are all covered under the 2 CFR Part 200. There have been some changes to the RFR process. There is a new template for all invoice submissions, and a progress report sheet has been added to assist for the documentation requirement. There are also going to be changes to the backup documentation requirement. Some of those include the first invoice submission requires that complete backup documentation, but once that first one is approved, the invoices moving forward can be streamlined by using the spot checking approach, and the templates can be submitted without the need of that backup documentation. But something to keep in mind is that it should be noted that backup documentation can be requested for any reason at any time. So MPOs will have 3 business days to be able to respond to TxDOT's request for that additional information. If for whatever reason there is no response from the MPO, the invoice will be rejected, but the MPOs are able to resubmit those invoices when all the information does become available or is corrected. And then the aspirational date for the final invoices are to try and get it in by December 15th, unless other arrangements can be coordinated through the MPO planner. And then we have a continuation, kind of talk more about the TPF RFR process. So those RFRs are the invoices for the eligible UPWP costs funded by TPF. MPOs may submit up to 24 RFRs per year or twice a month, but no less than 12 a year or 1 a month. TxDOT is required to reimburse each RFR within 15 business days. And as noted in the graphic, the 15 business day time frame, there we go, if you just want to go ahead and put all of them up, just kind of get the big picture, goes through multiple review periods before payment can be distributed to the MPOs. And then we have a deadline for the fiscal year invoice submissions. There are several processes that cannot be completed until all invoices are submitted for the federal fiscal year. We have certain deadlines to be aware of is that that will be impacted if invoices are not received in the designated time frame is that the APIR is expected to be submitted to TxDOT by state requirement on or before December 15th. And this is something to keep in mind so that FHWA can receive the APIR by federal requirement on or no later than December 29th. Work Order 3 will also experience some impacts to that if any delays are anticipated in submitting those MPO invoices as well. TxDOT will begin its audit and reconciliation process and needs to have it completed by the beginning of January so that the federal project authorization agreement can be approved on time by FHWA by January 31st. And then finally, we have one final slide for the APIR. Last item is that all MPOs are required to document their planning activities within the UPWP. The APIR captures those expenses and overruns and underruns by more than 25% require a written explanation. As previously stated, the APIR is due to the MPO coordinator by December 15th so that FHWA FTA can receive it by December 29th. And to keep on schedule for receiving FHWA FTA approval of compliance by January 31st. Any remaining funds will then be carried over into the next fiscal year. At that point, that's all of my information. If there's any questions, I'd love to take them.
Yeah, first, are there any questions before we ask a question? Joanne?
Yes, our fiscal agent does not close their books until December 31st. And we have to have stuff to TxDOT prior to that. What happens if there is oops, something was missed, and this is discovered after the due dates?
We're oh, Janie's got her hand up. Janie, were you going to jump in on that one? I think we're.
So I do think we've experienced that, and Philip has his hand up. He'll correct me here, and he'll actually improve my response. So Philip, if you can get ready, we do see that from time to time, and we could do a like a correction or reassessment off of the next year's budget. But Philip, if you want to enhance that answer, please take the floor. And you're on mute right now, Philip.
Philip, are you talking? We can't hear you.
Sorry, how about now?
That works?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. We would have to work through that with the TxDOT Finance Division. I don't know if I can give a blanket answer on every individual case, but it's something we would have to work through with our finance folks who do the final auditing of the numbers.
Okay, thank you, Philip. Casey, thank you. Any other questions out the gate? Barbara?
Thank you. I just wanted to offer 2 insights that might save people next year. When you're doing your APER, and I think Philip can speak to this also, when you're doing your annual report, you're reporting on the latest UPWP. So if you've done, let's just say an example of 4 amendments, you're not using the original UPWP to report on, you're using Amendment 4 to report your activities. So just be mindful, if you will, of that. And then, because that's tripped up some MPOs this year in crafting their APERs, they forgot to use their latest version. And then the other thing is something that's more than one MPO has done is in 2 CFR. I think we all know that we can go to the 10,000, but there's a specific statement in 2 CFR about 2 CFR 200 about the 10,000 and how it has to go through the Fed or pass-through agency. And so the MPOs will want to pick up that specific language. I'm sure TPP will give guidance, but they've also had some comments come back because of not picking up who the right agency is that you have to run the 10,000 back through. So thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Any questions as follow to that?
I just wanted to clarify on that 10,000. Is that for certain purchases, or if something's over 10,000 has been approved in the UP?
Keep in mind that reasonable and necessary is for the performance of the award.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. And then Juan.
Yeah, I was just asking about the 10,000 because I know if something's already approved in the UPWP, when it's over 10,000.
So if we're using this slide for the benefit of my comment, down in that bottom left corner about the 10,000, I think that's the food and beverage. What I'm talking about is even on equipment and things like that. that there's a specific statement into CFR 200 about the approving agency. And so it's going to depend on if you're a TMA or a non-TMA. So I would just caution to be sure and look at those citations when giving guidance on that, because I know several MPOs had to rewrite their statement in their UPWP. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and we do have that statement. So I guess I just wanted to clarify that 10,000 was just for equipment, software, or does it also apply to studies? I know we haven't done that for the studies.
Did you hear that question, Barbara? Oh, okay. The question was whether it would be for other than just equipment and that type of purchase, if it would be for studies as well. So Barbara, did you want to respond to that? Well, we'll get some clarity around that and make sure we're covering it accurately. Just equipment. Okay, thank you. Did want to come back to this slide before we left this section anyway, to ask, is this an area where you all have challenges? And so just as even a yes in chat, but is this an area where you all have had challenges kind of determining what fits? And I'm getting some head nods positively here. So if there's any insight or anything that you can share with us to help us make this more clear in what we put together in the guidance, then let us know. And then obviously, please pay attention to this section in the chapter when this comes around. I mean, pay attention to all sections, but yes, and if you have examples, we have found that to be very useful. We try to incorporate them into some of these chapters. So if you have particular examples where something was a little bit less clear, and then the decision that was made, that would be helpful. So anything else on this one? We're seeing no chat, so I guess no yes on challenges, but did get some nods here. So thank you for sharing that, Barbara. Thanks. She had just shared the 2 CFR, the language.
And I have another question for everyone else, just on the food request. If we stated in the UPWP, like for our annual meeting, we normally serve food. So if we state that in the UPWP, is that getting prior approval, or do I still need to send in a prior approval list and say I'm spending so much for food for this? And also, if we are doing workshops for our TAC or our other people that we may meet with, have workshops, things of that nature, do we have to list that individually also?
Okay. Do you know, team, whether UPWP is sufficient documentation for that approval once it's adopted, or whether there needs to be an individual request for that food and beverage beyond the UPWP? Yeah, so I don't know, Philip, if you know, and if we don't have an answer for you right now, Ria Donna will answer it and make sure it's in there.
No problem.
But it's a good question.
I think we'd have to probably get back to everyone on that one. Generally, it would depend on how specific the information is in the UPWP. So it sort of kind of depend. Yeah. I don't want to say just kind of give blanket approval based upon something that's in the UPWP unless it's in sufficient detail that we could, make a reasonable determination of whether it's necessary and reasonable.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments on this? Okay. All right. We're going to move on forward here to get to where we're in our next section. I'm going to hand it over to Travis.
Thank you, Jim. Jim showed the slide at the beginning as our catalog of resources that's being developed in parallel with the handbook. And we've just highlighted the resources that accompany the MPO work program administration topic. It's our intent that these resources will be linked in the handbook chapter and available through the MPO partner site as well, which is under development. Just wanted to go through quickly the resources that we've developed or have under development for these topics. For the APER, we're currently working on an update to the template and developing a checklist to go along with that template. We've also refined the timeline for APER resource distribution and development. For the transportation planning funds, you all probably recently saw the TPF invoice template that went out, as well as the guidance along with that, and developing some internal checklists for the team to support that as well. For the Unified Planning Work Program, we released a new template last year along with the checklist and an updated timeline and milestones. The team recently completed an after-action review of that process where we took another look at the template and the checklist, and we're making some revisions that Casey will update the team on at tempo tomorrow. Did want to take some time to get feedback from the Handbook Advisory Group on any of the resources they've seen so far to support these processes, or, as you're working through these things, any additional resources you think could be helpful to support you. I guess throwing out one example, last year we introduced the checklist, which was a new resource for the UPWP. Any feedback on that checklist and whether it was helpful for you all as an aid to developing your UPWP or in facilitating the review with the MPO coordinator?
I'll just speak up and be honest here. I didn't use the checklist because it seemed like, okay, this is the nicest way that I can put it. It seemed like there's just extra fluff writing that we had to do for the UPWP in this template. I hate executive summaries so much, that being one of them. So I skipped the checklist, but now knowing that I will have to be incorporated into the FY27, I'll get back to you on that.
We did talk about the executive summary, and I think one of the things we're going to change is it can be added to the UPWP and with a final submission. So the initial submission doesn't need that exec summary. So maybe that will help a little bit.
Anything else on that before we leave this slide? A tremendous amount of work going in parallel to kind of bring all these resources together. So, and yeah, there's a lot, and you can see here part of why, again, we were waiting on getting this chapter development for this specific topic because it's these resources that are so key to it. They're helping to answer some of the questions that we wanted to be sure to be answering in this chapter. So with that, we come to kind of an umbrella statement here. Based on what we've talked about with the handbook chapter and even what we've talked about with the supporting resources just now, are there any topics missing? All right, so you're thinking big picture, work program administration. We've talked about these different components that we're going to be addressing in this chapter, and obviously we're not all inclusive, all the detail, but this gives you the framework that we were planning to share as guidance through this chapter. So is there any topic that you didn't see here today that you're thinking, if I was going to do work program administration, this is an area that I would want to be sure that we're covering? So both online and in the room, please let us know if there's anything that's come to your mind that might be something that you would like some more detail on. And if we hear nothing, then I'm going to reframe the question and say, has everything we've presented made sense? And does it look like a good framework for the chapter? So we're getting a couple of nods in the room. Can we just get some in chat if you can respond to that? Was this a good framework for the chapter, and is this a good series of content in order to be able to cover this topic adequately for MPO work program administration? Don't be shy. So either wanting to know yes or no, this seems like it's a good framework. Well, we'll take silence and an empty chat as a yes. But we just want to be sure that we're capturing things in the right way possible. All right, so there's still time. We're going to be meeting for just a little bit longer here, but just be thinking about that. We went through these various topics, and this is just another question, are there any that need further clarification, additional details? That was kind of what we're asking already, but just going to put that in front of you as well. Does something seem like it needs a little detail? And you all have been very helpful at pointing out some of the things that we're going to need a little more clarity on, or that we will make sure that we bring into the chapter topics that are included. So anything else? Barbara?
I apologize if this is in there and I missed it. On occasion, the state would give MPOs a bump, if you will. And I know that the formula has been reworked, and I'm not addressing that. But does the chapter identify when an MPO can apply for a bump, or when the TPP might know that there are monies available? And I'm thinking particularly like Texarkana, Wichita Falls, I think Grayson County MPO have been benefactors in the past. And I don't recall if this chapter took into account a timeline for when an MPO that might need monies, like to carry a consultant contract or something like that, that doesn't usually have enough money to do that, when they could expect information on that.
SBR
Thank
funds.
you.
Yes.
Yeah, the chapter doesn't talk about SPR supplemental. Right now, we're not able to afford those requests, so we're not going to have it in the chapter. But if that ever came back online, we could amend it back into this chapter. Last year, when we were doing the TPF, we upped the minimums to help address some of that. But then also we pulled some data and saw that it had only been used like 5 times in the prior 5 years. And we felt like updating our minimum amount was addressing some of that need.
In a way, it sort of was, but at this time, I have added staff because we needed staff. And the bump that we got, the 375 that went up, that helped us afford a third person in our office, in which we needed. But with inflation and everything, we still rely on consultants to do some of our work. And the SPR funds, we always listed that in task 5 for special studies. And we used SPR funds to hire consultants to help us do our work.
All right. Thank you for that input, Rihanna, and thanks, Casey, for addressing that.
I'll just want to mention, I know there's a section in the planning agreement that mentions the UPWP rate. So I'm just making sure, I don't remember exactly line by line what it says, just to make sure that everything that's on there maybe is also in the chapter, right? I'm sure maybe you already did that exercise, but just in case.
So clarify one. I'm sorry. I didn't.
Yeah, so in the planning agreement,
Yep.
there's a section that mentions the UPWP. It seems like almost everything that's in there is in here, but just
Yes.
to
Yes.
cross-reference to make sure there's nothing else that's missing. One thing that always comes to mind is just the procurement. When we went through our audit, there are certain CFRs that we need to make sure we're looking at. But I know sometimes, like with our fiscal agent, we get confused because they deal a lot with other tech projects that are construction related, and they're familiar with other CFRs that might not apply to this program, and they think that we should be following those, when in reality, we should be following other ones that are, especially for the MPO program.
Okay. All right. Great. Yeah, thank you. Yes, we have been, and we'll continue to make sure we're doing that. Okay, just kind of looking ahead here. We'll continue the process as we have been all along the way, with communications continuing for those who are chapter reviewers. As said many times over the last year or so, please feel free to jump in and look at any time on that SharePoint site. You can see where we are with things. The next advisory group meeting, we haven't set the specific date yet. We're in, heavy mode working through things over this next few months. So we'll be looking at how to strategically do the next meeting to tie in best to what is going to be most critical to, as we land things. So again, just summarizing this schedule from before, you can see the progression of things. This has been kind of refining and realigning a little bit as we've proceeded along the way, and we'll probably continue to do so until we reach the finish line here at the end of the year. So I just think before we are kind of wrapping here, we want to just ask if there are particular chapters that you all are looking particularly forward to seeing, or those topics that are most critical to you. I mean, we did this on the front end, so we asked which of these things are going to be higher priority to you, but just kind of wanting to check in right now and see what you see as some of the most important of these, highest priority ones that you're anxious to see once they're done. So either online or in the room, is there one or two topics here that stand out to you as what you're most excited to have finished? Just can't wait to get that handbook chapter in your hands. So. And maybe you're saying you can't wait to get the entire handbook in your hands, but
That's correct. Yeah, I would say the MTP, CMP are two.
MTP and then CMP.
CMP.
Okay. Good. So one's come through, the other is forthcoming. CMP. Art? Don't think you're off mute if...
I apologize. So yeah, I think the FTP and the CMP also, congestion management process, along with performance management as it applies to some of the requirements for federal certification.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. And I misspoke. Actually, those three have been through, so we're working on the main ones, but that's good to know. Definitely hearing MTP and CMP, and then performance management is one of those things that we always need it when it gets to those critical points. So, any other topics?
I have a question.
Yes,
but I like the MTP is very important. Public involvement is another one that's very important. But I have a question about the MTP because we just adopted ours last year. So, is there going to be something in there that would tell us when we would have to comply with new things that come out since we've already adopted our MTP?
Well, typically your MTP, I'm going to speak,
Last 5 years.
someone correct me, but typically your MTP, your date that your deadline is, you're following whatever is applicable at that time. If things are newly in law, short of something, explicitly describing that you must make an amendment to your MTP, that's something you would pick up in the next 5-year update.
Okay.
So does anyone differ with that? Allison, did you want to see her off mute?
Jim, I was going to agree with you. I think that's typically, unless there is some, I guess, one-off guidance that kind of particularly brings that into the forefront. But that's what we've seen in the past, and I think performance measurement is a good example that as that was kind of rolled out, that was initially brought along with some of the MTPs, but now kind of continues to have rolling updates as new performance measures are adopted.
Yeah, and I know often the progression is once something is newly established, the time that it takes for it to get to guidance and then ultimately give the direction that will take, sometimes a couple of years anyway. So that makes sure that's ready by the time you've come to the next MTP. Art, do you have something to add to this?
I just wanted to mention something from a district perspective. I think the upcoming chapter or the upcoming discussions on those elements to the left of the schedule are going to be important in the collaboration between the MPOs, districts, and divisions. I mean, I think there's a lot of communication that's still left to be said in those items that is going to be critical, and how this is laid out, specifically like the MTP, the CMP, and then also the tips towards the bottom. So that it's gonna be important for the MPOs to chime in.
Thank you, Art. Yes. Yeah, and you actually make a good point. And Bridget, I saw that you have a chat. We'll come to that one just one sec. I did want to respond to that in a broader way because that kind of tees up a point. We've so much appreciated all the input that we get through this process. We'll continue to move through it as we have this kind of multi-step process. You all have seen all of the annotated outlines. You've seen some of the draft chapters, and then you'll see things as they're final. We want that input as much as we can get through this entire process. And then at that point, looking ahead to any potential revisions for the future, kind of identifying those areas that we might add additional information. So part of it is once you begin to use the chapter, it'll be more clear to you, hey, it would have been good if you had this in here too. So I think some of that will become more clear once things are out there and being used on a regular basis. So and then Bridget, yes. So this was a comment I know that you've provided in the past, and we appreciate that. It's a question about how to reflect maybe transit as its own topic within a handbook chapter for the future. So that's something that we think about for the long run. So thank you for that. Any other comments or questions? Okay. So, Casey, did you want to?
Yeah, I'll close this down here. I do think, given the discussion today, that this program management chapter is actually going to be one that we're going to need all hands on deck on, all eyes on that. Because right now, you saw some slides, but really what you need to do is review the chapter when it comes out and definitely call out any areas where it's either confusing or wrong or it just doesn't play out that way. Because that's the intent here, is for us to kind of summarize the regs and the TAC, but then also paint a picture of how it actually plays out in Texas. So if y'all have any questions or comments or concerns about the content when you see that chapter, definitely would appreciate y'all's attention on this particular chapter as we look to, we're in the home stretch here, right? So, but I'm excited about this handbook. It's something that we've been, was kind of identified with me when I got this position. I'm glad to see it culminating here in the next few months. I definitely appreciate your all's feedback. So thank you all for coming in today and for giving us as much of your attention as you can. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, with that, we wrap up, and we just thank you all so much again for the time, for being here in person and being online. We really appreciate it. So just keep paying attention, and we'll keep coordinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.